A warning from one of Canada's most prominent tech leaders is raising serious questions about the country's future in artificial intelligence. Jim Balsillie, the former CEO of BlackBerry, says Canada is at risk of falling behind in the global AI race and argues the country hasn't even left the locker room when it comes to competing in a data-driven economy. Let's talk more with Jim Balsillie. He's now the chair of the Centre for International Governance Innovation. Jim, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be with you.
So you spoke to Parliament actually last week, right? And seemed like you delivered a series of blunt warnings, is one way that I've seen it put. So what'd you have to say to Canada's political leaders?
Yeah, I didn't say we are at risk of falling behind. I said we have fallen behind. And I gave roughly 10 examples of U.S. doing economic statecraft in the realm of intangibles in the past year, and Canada's done nothing. And so we have to move beyond performativeness and gaslighting and actually have to start implementing things. And literally, there are no points on the board, and in some respects, negative points have been put on the board.
Why are we stuck in neutral?
Oh, there's just not the capacity in the political class and the policy class. They don't understand how economic statecraft is done in the era of intangibles. So it's outdated thinking rooted in the 1970s.
Now, we now have a minister of AI, right? Evan Solomon used to be a host here at Bell Media. It seems like there's various programs that they're doing. I mean, I had an interview last week with the Business Development Bank of Canada saying we're going to make businesses use AI and we're going to give them money and that kind of stuff. It seems like there's always a plan or a program, but I'm not so sure about results. Let's talk about that because it certainly Canada seems to be talking a big game.
Yeah, well, you can talk a big game, and that's fine, and that's what I mean by performativeness and gaslighting. But the outcomes, I mean, Canada has been last place in the 50 developed countries in the world in the last 5 years in growth of GDP per capita, and people feel it in the cost of living and in the in the eroding paychecks, and it's because of this outdated thinking. So if you look at all the programs, they're all 1970s thinking or nothing at all. And then I literally in my testimony laid out 10 very specific things that Trump has done in the past year. I don't subscribe to his ethics. I don't subscribe to his wars. But man, are they in their businesses jackhammering value chains for the economic and security benefit of America. And we need some of that action.
Well, and we've seen it, Jim, in the results of Canadian startups and the Canadian brain drain to the U.S., right? There are a couple of things that are not deniable when we see businesses and talent going south of the border. Why don't you tell our listeners about just some of the things that the U.S. is doing and eating our lunch in the process?
Sure. And people should know that just about a decade ago, 30% of Canadians left to start their businesses or move their business to the U.S. Now it's close to 70%. So this is a crisis, and there just seems to be no response and engagement to understand that. So many of the things they do, number one, trade agreements are not about trade. They're about instruments of regulatory remote control. And the U.S. has been jackhammering that with the tariffs and the digital requirements as one very, very specific example right now. They've also developed regulatory framework for digital assets and tokenization. They've done a national security strategy that drives standards and economic policy as part of security and intangibles. They've dramatically changed the role of the U.S. Patent Office that's involved in managing all of these kinds of U.S. advancement in that. They've created an AI legislative framework and much more. And so these are all economic statecraft for the era of intangibles to make America richer and more powerful and more secure. And we have to start doing this, but we never understood that this has been the realm of being prosperous and secure in the last 25 years. We've been using outdated thinking. So my main message is they've got to reorient where their attention is and build expertise for the contemporary realities.
We're talking about the AI race and how Canada is falling behind with Jim Balsillie, former CEO of BlackBerry, now chair for the Centre for International Governance Innovation. Jim, I find that far too many people, far too many of our listeners believe that things are just going fine. Things are okay, all swell in Canada, actually. Do you find the same thing? Do you find too many people that don't realize how far we're falling behind?
Well, I think it's one of these erosion things where you feel it, and I would put it this way: do you feel like your paycheck doesn't go as far as it used to, or do you feel that the quality of your paycheck's eroding? And these are consequences over time of this inattention to a changed world, which really started changing in force about 20 years ago. And then, of course, you get all these social ills from not governing this stuff, including mental health crisis for youth and inequality and social polarization and online fraud. So I think if you framed it by the erosion and the harms, I think people are feeling it, and I hear it in spades. Now, people may not know what the root cause is, and that's where the gaslighting and inattention needs to be challenged, and that's what I did. It's not being dealt with. The costs are severe. They're going to grow economically, non-economically, and we need to involve experts and a reorientation and not performativeness.
How would you turn it around?
The first thing I would do is involve experts, that they conceive of these things through an incentives model and its grants and its taxes and its quote unquote trade agreements, where this is really won and lost overwhelmingly through economic statecraft of legal frameworks. But we have essentially none of that expertise and none of that orientation. So the first thing I would do is rebuild the trade advisory committees that were disbanded roughly 20 years ago, with a focus of experts and front-footed orientation for these kinds of digital intangible issues that I'm talking about, and the economic and non-economic harms that come from the inattention.
When you see how far we've fallen behind, you make a great case for that. What do you think is the solution to changing the way that government handles it? Because, that it seems like government is standing in the way. How do they get out of the way?
Well, the nature of this is that the government does create the frameworks here. They do negotiate them legally, globally. They also establish them domestically. So the government creates the market and modifies it literally hundreds of times a day in various legal structures around the world. So there is a government there. It's not about getting out of the way, this neoliberal structure. It's getting in the way with understanding how it operates with proper expertise. And that just is not there. It has not been there. And so it requires, as I say, bringing in experts and reorientation. But Canada doesn't do discourse, it does bullying. And they use these gaslighting things, get out of the way or can't pick winners or we're the world leader, envy of the world and all that. And most importantly, we have to say this is a serious issue. There's erosion. We need to address it urgently with experts, and let's assemble that and get going. But the lack of action is really causing a high and increasing price. Just to give you an example, when the data-driven economy really started at force about 15 years ago in 2010, if Canada kept pace with the U.S., our GDP would be $1 trillion US a year higher now. That's $100,000 US a year per family of four in Canada. That's real cash, and that's what it costs when you don't attend to these things.
It sounds like you're worried, Jim. Sounds like you have a true worry about where we're headed.
Yeah, I'm trying to say, as a proud Canadian who loves this country, I'm not a partisan actor. We have to take this stuff seriously. We have to bring in experts and begin with action. But it's just not there. There's literally no points on the board in a year, and negative points by giving biggest money to U.S. firms under the auspices of sovereign compute. It just doesn't make sense.
And you brought up the U.S. a couple of times, but should we also bring up Europe and Asia? We falling behind our competitors, allies there?
Oh, enormously. We're definitely, they're moving very quickly, and I talked about that. And the truth of it is, in this global economy of intangible assets of AI, there really aren't economic allies, because it's a rentier system. Somebody's the landlord and somebody's the tenant. So everyone wants to be the landlord. And nobody wants to structurally be the tenant. So nobody's technically an ally anymore. It's not like a trading system. It's a rentier system. So everybody's involved doing strategic behavior, involving experts and playing the game, whether it's Southeast Asians or Europeans or the big China, the U.S. Everyone does it except Canada. So I'm just trying to wake them up and strip away the performative veneer they're trying to gaslight on Canadians.
Mr. Balsillie, Jim, I have to leave it there. It's great chatting with you this morning. Thanks so much.
Pleasure with
Jim Balsillie is chair for the Center for International Governance Innovation.
I'm Luke Wilson. Join me each week for Film Never Lies. Since retiring from the NFL, I've had a lot on my mind, and now I've got my own show. So if you're tired of lazy takes, if you want honest conversations, join us each week. Film Never Lies, available on all TSN platforms and the iHeartRadio app.